Somehow, she tried to tell me she was pregnant by me, but I refused to buy into that stupid idea. I've always used protection and paid attention to her ovulation periods. There's no way I could be responsible for her pregnancy, if any. But you know that these days girls have fabricated 1,000 ways of extorting money from men, but I have been in this game for a long time to be deceived by a Johnny Just Come JJC like Kate. So what happened to her? Eddie asked curiously. I sent her packing, he said. Thank God she still has her rented room at Okota. If not, it would have been hard to naturally throw her out in the street after all we have shared. I observed Eddie from the corner of my eye while pretending to be watching the match. I knew what was going on in his mind at that moment. Indeed, I said to myself, what if the baby in Kate's womb turns out to be Eddie's baby? I reached out for his hand again and held it as Ngo Baby returned to join the discussion. Of course, they immediately changed the topic of their gossip, and everyone had their opinion at heart and meditated over it. How on earth would Ikenna feel if one day it turns out that Eddie fathered a baby under his roof, watch and trust? Eddie's hands had turned cold when Ikenna confirmed he had thrown Kate out of the house. And that was enough evidence for me to believe his sense of guilt was affecting his body temperature. Eddie and Ngo Baby talked about football and politics, which was a little interest to me as I am sure none of them either voted in the last election or had a voter's card. It reminded me of my father's comments about the governor and the president, and I often reminded him that he was part of the problem since he had never exercised his franchise in one of our school debates. I made the winning point by proving beyond every reasonable doubt that only about 20% of the voting population participated and expressed their intentions in every election held in Nigeria. To that effect, I concluded all those in power lacked the express mandate of the people. I held on to my bottle of Guinness malt and allowed them to argue as they pleased. I couldn't even discuss it with Ngo Baby, not knowing anything about her, and she wasn't anywhere near my age bracket. I almost asked Eddie for his mobile phone so I could play some games or Google something to read. But men seem to have a particular attachment to their mobile phones, as if those gadgets held the secrets of their lives. I wish he had decided to buy me a mobile phone, as I would have had the courage to prioritize that before my back to school financial and material requirements. We finally went home after the last whistle, ending the match in favor of Chelsea. It would have been a lousy outing if Manchester had defeated Chelsea because they badly needed those 3 points to remain in the Champions League zone. The tension that hovered over the serene atmosphere when it still looked like a draw game eased out with loud jubilation from the Chelsea fans. I managed to stay out of Kate's case and did not allow it to come between Eddie and me, as it would only produce grief and altercations. In open-ended matters of this nature, wisdom demands that you wait until you get to the bridge, and whatever you see, you use it to cross. Imagine a situation where I fight and bruise over something I cannot presently influence. It will only pitch me against him. I initially thought of buying into it and using it as an excuse to run away and return home to my parents, claiming that the man already had a wife who was expecting a baby. For how long will I remain a fugitive when all odds at home have already pitched themselves against me? The few days I have spent with Eddie have been positively impactful, and it has looked as if God sent me here on a rescue mission to help him move away from the present stagnation that seems to have engulfed his entire life. As we brushed and freshened up in readiness for bed, I thought of how best to bring up his promise to my father about ensuring that I returned to school right away on arrival to Lagos. I was not even sure that my father meant what he told me about the school affair, because they might have agreed that he should get me pregnant to ensure that I did not get the chance to run away from the marriage. I would be a fool to get pregnant and drop out of school at this age, I silently assured myself. I made him renew his promise of sleeping in the same bed without attempting to play adult games with a teenager. He laughed out so loud but gave me his words. As we lay in bed, I braced up with good entry behavior of calling him baby. It immediately caught his attention. and I could notice his preoccupation. He thought I would discuss the pending issues around his girlfriend, Kate. Baby, I said, what's your plan for my return to school? It's been almost 1 month since I left school. The first term is about to end. I already spoke to a friend who is a principal in a public school about admitting you into his school, but he insisted we must present a testimonial and the last results from your former school. He suggested the best option is to put you in one of the many private secondary schools around here. Thanks for reminding me, he said. There are a few secondary schools 2 streets away from here, and by Monday, we shall see the principal and inquire about their requirements. What do you think? I was contemplating asking you to find a house in a completely new area and move so that we will not have a repeat of what transpired the other day between you and Kate. However, on second thoughts, I consider that changing house is not easy. Then I think you should inform those side chicks that your village wife has finally arrived and that she is a timid wild cat whose tail they should never touch even while she's asleep. Eddie mopped at me like a boy whose mother had just called to order. When we later went to bed that night, it became a long night of no baby, no Eddie, stop, Oga Eddie, please keep your promise before I shout. He finally stopped and started trying to talk sense into my understanding. Baby, he said, you have been a huge motivator and inspiration in my life. You have added hope to my hopelessness and strengthened my weakness towards women. I was at my lowest point when you came into my life. And I don't know what I would have done to Kate a few days ago when she came to break my windows. Only God knows in what mess I would have landed myself in an attempt to teach her a lesson. I'm impulsive and would have gone out there to give her the beating of her life. But then I might have ended up in the police net for murder. Now that I have come this far, I don't want to return to my former Egypt, as they say in the church. So what do you want me to do, sir? Should I open my legs for you, get pregnant, and drop permanently out of school? No, baby, he responded. I didn't know that I married a potential genius. And the last thing I want to do now is allow you to drop out of school. He looked at me as if desirous of reading my mind and continued. He paused as if what he wanted to say was too heavy for his tongue. If you agree, I thought of taking you to visit a gynecologist for family planning. That will help me fight the spirit of a playboy that's overtaken my sexual self-control. It shocked me to hear these things from him. I had always imagined that he would force me into having a sexual relationship with him, drug my food or drink, and have his way. Each time we sat to eat, I would take my mineral or malt from the fridge and open it myself. That he drinks beer in place of water also made me suspect the water in the refrigerator, which we usually fill directly from the tap and keep in the fridge to refrigerate. Hearing his sincere opinion and concern over this matter reassured me, and I became more relaxed with him. For the first time, I accepted that I am now a married girl. We finally went to sleep and got carried away by a preconditioned mindset. The same scenario that played out before the discussion came back into my dream. We struggled as Eddie tried to pull off my underwear until he had his way. I was shouting, but no one came to my help. I looked through the window and saw people passing by, but no one noticed my call for help. Suddenly, I heard Eddie calling my name. Then he shook me, and I woke up trembling and sweating like a he-goat. What's the matter, baby? Were you having a nightmare? Yes, baby, it must have been a nightmare. I stopped at that because I was too ashamed to tell him about my dreams, because he had just assured me a few hours ago he wouldn't do anything like that. I gradually fell asleep once again and prayerfully wished away the nightmare. We had an early breakfast and visited 2 schools in search of admission. Both schools showed interest in admitting me and gave us their conditions and requirements. They did not hide the fact that they often hunt for brilliant students to maintain the standard for which they were known. The second school we visited organized an immediate interview with 2 teachers to verify my capacity to join the SS1 class. For 3 years, the school has scored one of the highest general average marks for external examinations. The They were curious to find out why I started school late. The principal asked me how many classes I failed and why. She explained she needed to know all these details to better place me with teachers who might be patient enough to help me. We both struggled to answer those questions. I was going to tell them I started school very late, but Eddie, in his capacity as my maternal uncle, blamed my predicaments on my father, who believed that the place of a woman was in the kitchen and her husband's bed. They proceeded with the interview like a mini examination on various subjects. They discovered that I was ahead of their syllabus despite coming from what they had considered a village school. Being studious and studying ahead of the syllabus always places you above others. We saved ourselves the embarrassment of letting them know the details of our relationship because right after the interview, the principal read out what I considered a riot act. She specified it was the rules and regulations of the school that they would dismiss any girl who got pregnant from the school. She sat Uncle Eddie down and started educating him on the ills of giving away teenage girls into early marriage and the damage it had been creating within society. We have pushed many brilliant girls out of the school system through the mere carelessness of our parents, who purposefully refused to meet their basic needs as a girl child. Many of these girls end up being lured into the arms of evil men for just a gift of a few hundred naira. I was pinching myself and holding my breath from laughing. I avoided looking into Eddie's eyes then, not to compromise a situation that was playing out in my favor. Could the principal be one of those angels who showed up in human flesh to fight our unspoken battles? I asked myself in silence. When she finished reading, she signed 2 copies of the same rules and regulations, shoved them to Eddie to sign as my guardian, and made me countersign as a witness. She gave us 1 copy and kept 1 for my school registration file. If you can meet her requirements, she can start school tomorrow. She called in her secretary to take down my sizes for dresses and shoes and verify if they had my sizes in stock. As we drove home that afternoon, after the interview and encounter with the principal, I silently reflected on what had just transpired at the principal's office. I felt that my mother's friend, Lady Promise, whom I had severally attempted to run to without success, has suddenly manifested her presence and protection through the principal. I could imagine her same zeal and reaction if only she had wind of what was happening to me. I was too confident that she would have said the same things the principal had told Uncle Eddie. We returned home to consider the school fees and other associated costs. Eddie wanted to know my opinion and choice between the 2 schools we visited. Naturally, my favorite was obvious. Who wouldn't choose the school where they just encountered an angel? I was, however, concerned about his finances and my desire to avoid anything that would unnecessarily make him spend more money as these fees increased by the day. Thank God the school fees for both schools were almost the same. Otherwise, I would have felt a sense of guilt at making him pay higher school fees when he had the option of spending less. I could not place him properly since he did not mention what he does for a living. So far, I've had to go by elimination, pending when he decides to speak to me about it. One thing is obvious, though he's not a civil servant because since we returned from Onitsha, he has neither gone to work or made any phone call to extend his leave or justify his absence, he couldn't be an entrepreneur because at least he would have visited his factory. From my little knowledge, I know that no matter how small his factory may be, a proxy cannot run it all this while he has been absent. Could he be a trader? If he had a shop, he would have visited his sales rep, checked accounts, or followed up with their sales. He did none of these and had never talked about going to work. From the little I knew, traders keep their apprentices in their houses since they simultaneously serve the dual papers of being salespersons and home helps. He spent most of his free time on his laptop and telephone and often changed discussions or outright cut the phone when I come in. The normal me would have asked questions out of curiosity, but I wouldn't want it to look like I was monitoring him, mainly because he's officially my husband. My mind somehow started suggesting useless source, and I suspected he might be a 419 or Yahoo swindler. I couldn't place him and I didn't want by any means to imagine him being into such a dirty deal. which by any standard is digital robbery. I meant to involve him in my midnight prayers and morning devotions, but I must use the obvious word which I have avoided. That magic word says, a family that prays together stays together. It was 5 a.m. on Saturday when I woke up and I decided not to pray alone. I started singing in a low voice and gradually raised my voice until he joined me in the chorus. I switched to that number by the voice of the cross which said, in the morning, early in the morning, I will arise and praise the Lord. To my greatest surprise, he concluded by saying, a family that prays together stays together. It was a great lesson, and it helped me deal with living with bias and prejudice. That I was uncertain of what Eddie does for a living pushed me into judging and condemning him, making no effort to hear his side of the story. When we finished with the morning devotions, I asked him what he wanted for breakfast, and in his usual sarcasm, he said his first choice for breakfast was to eat me up right here in his bed, but that the second option on the menu would also be sufficient unto the morning. So what is the second option, baby? I could make fried plantains with custard if that pleases my lord. Just say it and consider it done. That's cool, he said. But remember that too much iron from plantains and custard generates a lot of sperm, which is not good enough for a man practicing forced abstinence. We both burst out laughing at his endless sense of humor. I precisely made those things for breakfast and we both had our fill. It looked more like a family setting and our familiarity grew stronger as I gradually understood that I should discuss virtually anything with him. We went out to see a friend of his later that Saturday morning. He had a bunch of keys and I wondered what he was going to do with all those keys. We stopped over in 5 places and people were waiting for him to see the properties at each location. He would open the door, show them every nook and cranny of the house, and talk about either the annual rent or the outright sale of the home. Without words, I realized he was a real estate agent.